The first thing my daughter said after 10 years of silence was not hello. It was not I am sorry. It was not even I missed you. It was a number, $2 million. She stood on my front porch like a stranger who had memorized my address from a file. Same sharp chin I once kissed goodnight. Same eyes, colder now, measuring the house behind me like it was already hers. She did not look at the garden I planted with her son when he was still learning how to spell his name. She did not look at the wind chime he picked out at a Christmas market when he was 6. She looked past me as if I were furniture. You have 30 days, she said, or I take him. That was when I knew this was not a reunion, it was a threat. I am 58 years old. My knees ache when the weather turns. I wake before dawn out of habit, not ambition. For 10 years, I raised my grandson alone. I signed school permission slips. I sat through parent-teacher conferences where they called me grandmother, with a pause, unsure. I learned how to pack lunches without peanuts because of another child's allergy. I learned how to explain gently why his mother lived far away and loved him in her own way. That was the lie I told myself so I could sleep. 10 years ago, my daughter showed up at my door in the middle of the night with a newborn and a suitcase that wasn't even hers. She smelled like hospital soap and panic. She said she needed a few weeks. She said she would be back. She said she was not ready. She never came back. No birthday cards, no Christmas calls, no child support. Just a few social media photos I pretended not to see. Her smile wide on beaches I could not afford, her hand on a man's chest that changed every year. I did not chase her. I chose the baby instead. His name is Caleb. He learned to ride a bike on the cracked sidewalk in front of this house. He learned to read sitting at the same kitchen table where my daughter now placed her manicured hand, tapping impatiently as she laid out her demand like a business proposal. You have assets, she said. The house, the trust Dad left you, your retirement accounts. Don't pretend you don't. My husband died before he could see what kind of woman his daughter would become. He left me a modest inheritance enough to live without fear, but not enough to be careless. I used it to give Caleb stability. Private tutoring when he struggled, therapy when he asked hard questions at night, a savings account for college I never told anyone about. She knew, which meant she had done her homework. If you don't pay, she continued, voice smooth, I'll file for custody. I'm his mother. Judges care about that. I looked at her, then really looked. At the expensive coat, the practiced calm, the absence of shame. And something inside me, something I had kept buried under years of survival and sacrifice, shifted. She thought this was about money. She had no idea what she had just started. That night after she left, I sat on Caleb's bed and watched him sleep. His face was still soft with childhood, one hand curled around the blanket, the way he did when he was scared. I realized then that the fear I had lived with for 10 years had changed shape. It was no longer about being abandoned. It was about being underestimated. And I decided quietly that if my daughter wanted a war, I would teach her something she had forgotten. You do not threaten a woman who has already lost everything. I did not sleep after she left. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the same table where I had cut pancakes into tiny squares and helped with science projects, and listened to Caleb practice spelling words out loud. The house creaked the way it always did before morning, settling into itself like an old woman stretching sore joints. I had lived here long enough to know every sound. None of them comforted me that night. By 7, Caleb came down the stairs rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in the back. He was 10 now, tall for his age, all knees and elbows. He poured cereal and asked if I was okay. I told him I had a headache. It was easier than explaining that his mother had walked back into my life like a storm with a deadline. After he left for school, I called my lawyer. Margaret Klein had been my friend before she was my attorney. We met years ago through my husband, back when life still felt predictable. She knew my family history. She knew the parts I never said out loud. When I told her my daughter was back and demanding money, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. How much, she finally asked. When I said the number, she let out a low whistle. That's not a request, she said. That's extortion. She says she'll file for custody. She can try, Margaret replied. But she abandoned him. We can prove that. The courts don't look kindly on a parent who disappears for a decade and comes back with an invoice. I wanted to believe her, but fear has a way of finding cracks logic cannot seal. After we hung up, I pulled out the old box from the hall closet. Inside were documents I never imagined needing again. Hospital discharge papers from the night Caleb was born. Text messages printed out because I was afraid my phone would die and take the proof with it. the single note my daughter left behind, written on the back of a grocery receipt. "I can't do this. Please take care of him. I'll come back when I can." There was no date, no signature, just a promise that dissolved like smoke. By noon, I had scheduled a consultation with a family court specialist. By 2, I was reviewing bank statements, listing assets, writing timelines. This was not grief anymore. This was preparation. That evening, my daughter called. She did not ask how Caleb was. She did not ask about me. She asked if I had spoken to a lawyer. "I've thought about your offer," I said. "It's not an offer," she snapped. "It's reality." I could hear traffic in the background, the hum of a city that had never made room for a child. "You left him," I said quietly. "You don't get to make demands now." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think judges care about feelings? I'm his mother. Blood matters. So does abandonment." Her voice hardened. 30 days. After that, I file. When the line went dead, my hands were shaking. I stood in the kitchen staring at the phone, realizing something important. She was confident, too confident, which meant she believed she had leverage I had not seen yet. The next week passed in a blur of meetings and memories. Margaret helped me file for permanent guardianship, something I should have done years ago, but never had the heart for. I gathered witness statements, teachers, neighbors, doctors, people who knew me as the woman who showed up every single time. But late one night, as I was sorting through paperwork, I found something that stopped me cold. A letter from a bank I did not recognize, addressed to my daughter, sent to my house, dated 8 years ago. I opened it with shaking fingers. It referenced a trust account opened in my husband's name, an account I had never known existed. And suddenly the pieces shifted. She was not here because she wanted her son. She was here because she believed there was more money than I had ever told her about. And if that was true, then she had made one very dangerous mistake. She had underestimated how far I would go to protect the child she abandoned. I did not tell Caleb about the letter. Some truths are not meant for 10-year-old shoulders. Instead, I slid it back into the envelope and locked it in the small, fireproof safe beneath my bed, the one my husband insisted on buying after a neighbor's break-in years ago. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now I wondered how many other things he had protected me from without my knowing. The next morning, I drove to the bank listed on the letter. It was a brick building on the edge of downtown old money architecture that favored quiet discretion over glass and flash. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish. A woman at the front desk asked how she could help me. I gave her my husband's name. Her smile changed, not dramatically, just enough. She disappeared into the back and returned with a man in his early 40s, neatly pressed suit eyes alert. He introduced himself as Daniel Price, Senior Trust Officer. When I told him I was the widow, he nodded and led me to a private office. "I can confirm the account exists," he said carefully, fingers steepled. "But I can't disclose details without proper verification." I handed him my identification, my marriage certificate, the death certificate. He examined each document slowly, then typed something into his computer. His expression shifted again. "There is a trust," he said, "established by your husband approximately 12 years ago." 12, I repeated, before Caleb was born, before my daughter left. "Yes, it was structured to activate under specific conditions." My heart began to pound. "What conditions?" He hesitated. "I believe it would be best if your attorney were present for the full discussion." Of course it would. By the time I left the bank, my hands were numb on the steering wheel. I felt like I had stepped onto unfamiliar ground, the kind that looks solid until you realize it can give way at any moment. My husband had kept secrets, not small ones, intentional ones. That night, after Caleb was asleep, I pulled out old photo albums. I was not looking for pictures. I was looking for patterns. For moments I might have dismissed at the time. My husband spending long hours in his study, phone calls he took outside, a lawyer's business card tucked into a drawer I rarely opened. I remembered the argument we had the year before he died. My daughter had asked him for money, a large sum. He refused. She accused him of favoring me, of planning to cut her out. He told her she needed to learn consequences. At the time, I thought it was just another family conflict. Now I wondered if it had been something more. 2 days later, my daughter showed up again. This time unannounced. She rang the doorbell like she owned the place. Caleb was at a friend's house. I was grateful for the timing. "I know you went to the bank," she said the moment I opened the door. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. "You've been watching me." She shrugged. "I've been careful." "So this is what this is really about." Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile if there were warmth behind it. "Don't pretend you don't benefit from what Dad left. I deserve my share. You abandoned your child. That has nothing to do with money. Everything has to do with money, I said. You just forgot who taught you that. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You have 2 weeks now. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart racing. She was escalating, which meant she was nervous, which meant the trust was real and it mattered. I called Margaret immediately. When I told her about the bank visit, she was silent for a long moment. Your husband was a careful man, she said finally. If he created a trust without telling you, he did it for a reason. And my daughter knows about it. Yes, Margaret said, but she may not know everything. That night I made a decision I should have made years ago. I stopped reacting. I started planning. If my daughter thought she could bully me into handing over my life's security, she was wrong. And if she believed blood alone would save her from consequences, she was about to learn how deeply mistaken she was. Because secrets once uncovered have a way of turning the tables. And I was done being the one caught off guard. Margaret came over the next afternoon with a yellow legal pad and the kind of calm that only comes from having seen families tear themselves apart before. She did not waste time on sympathy. She dealt in facts, timelines, leverage. First, she said, sitting at my kitchen table, we assume your daughter is preparing to file something. Custody, visitation, financial claim. Maybe all three. Second, we assume she believes the trust is her key. Third, we figure out what she does not know. I poured coffee with hands steadier than they had been days earlier. Fear had burned itself out. What remained was focus. Margaret reviewed everything I had gathered. Hospital records, school enrollment forms listing me as primary guardian, medical bills paid from my account, emails to my daughter that went unanswered for years. Each page told the same story, not abandonment by circumstance, abandonment by choice. She will argue she was young, Margaret said, that she was manipulated, that she came back as soon as she could. She came back when she needed money, I replied. Exactly. Margaret leaned back. Now about the trust. Your husband's attorney drafted it carefully. I pulled the records this morning. I held my breath. It's not an inheritance trust, she continued. It's a conditional one. Very specific. Very intentional. She slid a document across the table. I read slowly, my eyes catching on phrases that made my chest tighten. The trust was established to benefit Caleb. Not my daughter, not me. It stipulated that funds would be released only if my daughter demonstrated consistent parental involvement over a minimum period of time verified by third parties without financial coercion or legal threats. And then there was the clause that made my throat go dry. Any attempt to extort, threaten custody, or initiate litigation primarily for financial gain would result in permanent forfeiture of her beneficiary status. She walked straight into it, Margaret said quietly. I sat back stunned. My husband had seen this coming. Maybe not the exact details, but the shape of it. He had loved our daughter, but he had trusted actions more than words. She doesn't know this, I said. No, Margaret replied. She knows the trust exists. She does not know how it works. That night I barely slept. Not from fear, but from the weight of realization. For 10 years I had carried guilt for not fixing things, for not forcing reconciliation, for choosing peace over confrontation. All that time, my husband had been building a net beneath us, one I had never known was there. The next morning, I received an email from my daughter's attorney. Formal, polite, aggressive beneath the surface. They intended to file for emergency custody, citing financial instability, advanced age, and alleged emotional manipulation of a minor. I laughed out loud when I read it, not because it was funny, because it was transparent. That afternoon, Caleb came home quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack by the door and sat at the counter without asking for a snack. Grandma, he said, eyes fixed on the wood grain my mom messaged me. My heart lurched. What did she say? She asked if I wanted to live with her. She said you were keeping me from her. I took a breath before answering. What did you tell her? He looked up at me, then eyes steady in a way that felt older than 10. I told her she should have come sooner. Something in my chest broke and healed at the same time. I pulled him into a hug and held him longer than usual. I did not tell him about lawyers or trusts or threats. I told him he was loved, that he was safe, that no one could take him away without a fight. Later that night, after he was asleep, I drafted my response to her attorney with Margaret's help. We did not threaten, we did not plead. We documented, and we included one sentence carefully worded that hinted at the existence of conditions she might want to reconsider. The trap was set. All that remained was to see whether my daughter would stop or whether she would do exactly what she had always done. Push harder, and this time lose everything. The silence that followed our response lasted 3 days. 3 long days where I woke before dawn and lay still listening for the phone to ring the doorbell to chime the sound of my life being interrupted again. It did not come, and in that silence I learned something important. My daughter was not retreating, she was regrouping. On the 4th day, Caleb's school called. The principal's voice was careful, rehearsed. "We had a woman come in this morning claiming to be Caleb's mother. She requested access to his records and attempted to sign him out." My hand tightened around the phone, and "She could not provide documentation. We denied the request, but I felt you should know." When I hung up, my legs felt weak. I sat down slowly, pressing my palm flat against the table until the room steadied. This was no longer posturing. This was intrusion. Margaret was already drafting an emergency filing when I called her. "Good," she said grimly. "That helps us." It felt wrong to think of my grandson being used as evidence, but reality does not ask permission. That evening, my daughter showed up again, this time with someone else. A man in his 30s, expensive shoes, too confident smile. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. He was there to intimidate. "We just want to talk," my daughter said, as if we were neighbors discussing a fence line. "I prefer communication through counsel," I replied. The man chuckled. "That's not necessary. This doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is," I said. My daughter stepped forward. "You're old. You're tired. You can't raise a teenager. Let him go. Take the money. Everyone wins." "You don't win," I said softly. "You get paid." Her face hardened. "You think you're noble. You're not. You're just in the way." That night I did something I had avoided for years. I told Caleb the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I told him his mother was asking for money, that there were lawyers involved, that he might hear things that were confusing or hurtful. He listened without interrupting, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Do I have to go with her?" he asked. "No," I said. "Not unless you want to." He shook his head immediately. "I don't." I slept better than I had in weeks. 2 days later, the filing came through. My daughter was suing for custody and damages. She alleged emotional alienation, financial exploitation, and improper control of a minor's inheritance. Margaret smiled when she read it. "She's triggered the clause." "What does that mean?" "It means she's officially disqualified." I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. The door my husband had left open, the one that allowed our daughter to redeem herself, had just slammed shut, by her own hand. We scheduled the hearing. The night before court, I stood in Caleb's doorway and watched him sleep. I realized that whatever happened next, the woman who raised him would not disappear quietly. And neither would the truth. Because when people come for what you love most, you do not meet them with fear. You meet them with everything they forgot you had. And my daughter was about to learn that the woman she abandoned had become someone she could no longer control. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of place where voices instinctively lowered themselves out of respect or fear. I arrived early, as I always did when something mattered. Margaret met me at the entrance, her file tucked under her arm, her expression unreadable. My daughter arrived 15 minutes late. She wore a tailored suit and the confidence of someone who believed appearances could substitute for history. The man from my porch was with her again, along with a younger attorney who looked eager and underprepared. She did not look at me. She kissed Caleb's cheek quickly like it was a performance, then took her seat. The judge was a woman in her 60s. Gray hair, pulled back glasses low on her nose. She did not smile when she entered. That alone calmed me. Proceedings began with my daughter's attorney painting a story I barely recognized. A young mother overwhelmed, a grandmother who overstepped, a child manipulated into loyalty. They spoke of my age, my health, my supposed isolation. They spoke of money like it was destiny. Then it was our turn. Margaret did not rush. She introduced evidence like stepping stones across a river. School records, medical decisions, therapy invoices, letters unanswered, years measured not in words but in absences. Then she introduced the trust. I watched my daughter's posture change when the judge asked for clarification. Margaret explained the conditions calmly, precisely. She explained the forfeiture clause. She explained the triggering actions. My daughter leaned forward. "That's not fair," she said, interrupting. "I didn't know." The judge looked at her over her glasses. "Ignorance of terms does not invalidate them." But she hid it from me. My daughter insisted, pointing at me. They both did. I met her eyes then. "You hid from your son." The courtroom went quiet. The judge asked Caleb if he wanted to speak. Margaret and I had discussed this. We had left the choice to him. He stood slowly, hands shaking just a little. He spoke clearly. "She didn't come to my birthdays," he said. "Grandma did. She didn't call when I was sick. Grandma stayed. I don't know her. I know who takes care of me." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I did not look away. The judge nodded. "Thank you." The ruling was swift. Custody denied, claims dismissed, trust benefits revoked permanently. My daughter did not cry. She stared ahead, jaw clenched, as if she could will the outcome to change through sheer refusal. Outside the courthouse, she finally turned on me. "You planned this," she hissed. "You set me up." "No," I said. "You did exactly what you've always done. You chose yourself." She laughed bitterly. "Enjoy it. He'll hate you when he's older." I watched her walk away without looking back at her son. That night after Caleb fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. Victory did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy, final. Margaret called to check in. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied quietly. "It's just changed shape." I knew my daughter. I knew she would not disappear gracefully. But something fundamental had shifted. The power she thought she had was gone. And for the first time in 10 years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was not built around fear. I turned off the lights and stood by the window watching the street lamp flicker. Some battles are won in court. Others are won by refusing to become what hurt you. And the most dangerous thing I had become to my daughter was not wealthy or prepared or protected. It was untouchable. The weeks after the hearing were quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the pause after a storm when the air has not decided what it wants to be yet. Caleb returned to school, laughing with his friends, arguing with me about bedtime like nothing monumental had happened. Children are better at survival than adults. They move forward because they have to. I, on the other hand, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It came in the form of a letter, not from a lawyer, not from a court, from my daughter. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, plain white, no return address. I recognized her handwriting immediately. It was steadier than it used to be, the loops tighter controlled. I stood at the counter for a long time before opening it, as if the paper itself could bruise me. She did not apologize. She wrote about betrayal, about how the system was rigged, about how our family had always chosen me over her. She said my husband poisoned things long before he died. She said I turned her son against her. Then near the end, she wrote something that made my stomach tighten. "You think this is over. It isn't. I still have options." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. There was no threat explicit enough to take to the police, no admission that could be used in court, just the same manipulation she had practiced her whole life, sharpened now by desperation. That night I dreamed of my husband. He was sitting at this kitchen table reading the paper the way he used to, glasses sliding down his nose. I told him everything, about the trust, the court, the letter. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he looked up at me and said, "You still think this ends with her?" I woke before I could ask what he meant. The next sign came from a direction I did not expect. A woman knocked on my door one afternoon while Caleb was at soccer practice. She introduced herself as a reporter, said she was working on a piece about grandparents raising grandchildren and wanted to ask a few questions. I told her no. 2 days later, a different reporter called. Then another. Each one referenced anonymous tips, allegations, a disputed custody battle involving substantial family wealth. My daughter was trying to control the narrative. Margaret confirmed it when I called her. "She's fishing for public sympathy," she said. "If she can't win legally, she'll try socially. And if she paints me as the villain..." "She's hoping you'll panic," Margaret replied, "or pay her to make it stop." I stared at the window, watching a neighbor walk her dog past the house. What if she doesn't stop? Margaret paused. "Then we stop her." That was when we decided to go on the offensive. Not with interviews, not with press releases, with documentation. Margaret helped me prepare a comprehensive record. 10 years of caregiving, medical consent forms, financial statements showing every dollar spent on Caleb's care, counseling notes, teacher letters, even the school incident where my daughter attempted to remove him without permission. We did not leak it. We waited. The call came 3 nights later. My daughter, crying this time. Real tears, not the performative kind. "They're going to run a story," she said. "They're saying I abandoned him." "You did?" I replied. "They're destroying me." "No," I said. "You did that too." She sobbed harder, then her voice shifted sharp and cold. "You always win." I almost corrected her, almost told her this was never about winning. But some lessons do not land unless you let silence teach them. When I hung up, I realized something I had not allowed myself to see before. My daughter did not want her son. She wanted leverage. And now that she had lost it publicly, not just legally, she was unraveling. The tables were turning, and for the first time I understood what my husband had done all those years ago. He had not just built a trust, he had built a truth. And once truth starts moving, it does not stop just because someone is uncomfortable. It keeps going. straight through every lie that once felt untouchable. The story broke on a Friday morning. I did not read it right away. Margaret sent the link with a single line. It's factual. It's contained. Breathe. I waited until Caleb was at school, until the house was quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts again. Then I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began to read. The headline was restrained, almost gentle. A profile of a grandmother raising her grandson after parental abandonment. No names in the first paragraphs, just context. Then slowly the facts unfolded. Court records, timelines, a failed custody claim, a trust established to protect a child's future. My daughter's version of events appeared briefly quoted without embellishment. The contradictions spoke for themselves. By the time I reached the end, my hands were shaking, not from fear, from the finality of it. This was now public truth. The phone rang all day. Old friends, distant relatives, people who had stayed neutral for years suddenly remembering how to reach me. Some offered support, some offered advice I did not ask for. A few wanted gossip. I answered none of them. That evening, Caleb came home quieter than usual. They were talking about us, he said, dropping his backpack by the door. At school. My chest tightened. What did they say? That my mom was on the news, he replied. That you're rich. I exhaled slowly. And what do you think? He shrugged. I think people talk when they're bored. I smiled, then a real one. He had learned that from me. Later that night, my daughter showed up again. She did not knock. She stood on the sidewalk staring at the house like it had betrayed her. When I opened the door, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, spiritually. You humiliated me, she said. You humiliated yourself. They'll never hire me again. My clients are gone. I'm toxic now. You made yourself that way, I replied. You used your son as a bargaining chip. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. You could fix this. I waited. You could say it was a misunderstanding. You could talk to them. You could make it stop. And what would that cost me? She swallowed. Forgiveness. I felt something settle inside me then. A quiet, steady line. Forgiveness is not a transaction, I said, and it does not erase accountability. She shook her head angry now. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I'm surviving it. She stepped back, her voice breaking. I was your daughter, and he is my grandson. That was the moment she understood. She left without another word. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the article still open on my screen. I thought about how many years I had spent protecting her image, explaining her absence, smoothing over the damage she caused. Truth had done in one day what 10 years of silence never could. It had drawn a line. The next morning, I received a message from a woman I did not recognize. She said she had gone through something similar. She thanked me for speaking up. I did not reply, but I saved the message, because I realized then that this story was no longer just mine. And that scared my daughter more than any courtroom ever could. Because once people see themselves in your truth, it becomes bigger than family. It becomes something that cannot be bought, or threatened, or taken away. The backlash did not come from strangers. It came from family. My sister called 3 days after the article ran. We had not spoken in months, not since she told me I should let things go for the sake of peace. Her voice was tight controlled the way it got when she had already decided she was right. You didn't have to destroy her, she said. I didn't, I replied. I told the truth. She's your daughter, and he's my grandson. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing the hum of a television in the background. People are talking, she continued. They're saying we raised her wrong. They're saying Dad planned to cut her out. They're saying things about the will. I didn't say any of that, but it's implied. I closed my eyes. This was the pattern. When faced with harm, my family had always focused on optics. Who looked bad? Who embarrassed whom? Never who was hurt. She left a baby on my doorstep, I said. She came back with an ultimatum. My sister sighed. She was struggling. So was I said. The difference is I stayed. By the end of the call, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. The illusion of family loyalty had cracked, and I could see clearly who wanted silence more than justice. That afternoon, Margaret forwarded me an email from my daughter's former employer. They had terminated her contract, cited reputational risk, no appeal. I felt no satisfaction reading it, only confirmation. That night, Caleb asked me something I had been dreading. Do you think my mom hates you? I chose my words carefully. I think she hates what she lost control over. Does she hate me? No, I said firmly. She doesn't know how to love you. That's not the same thing. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. Children understand more than we give them credit for, especially when truth is offered without poison. The next development came quietly. Margaret called to tell me the trust administrator had received an inquiry. My daughter was attempting to challenge the forfeiture clause, claiming undue influence and emotional coercion by my husband before his death. She's reaching, Margaret said, but she's also burning bridges. Let her, I replied. A week later, we received the court's response. Dismissed without hearing. The judge cited clear language, independent counsel, and voluntary execution. No evidence of coercion, no grounds to proceed. That should have been the end. Instead, my daughter sent one last message. You think you've won, but one day he'll ask why his mother disappeared, and you'll have to answer for that. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, I will tell him the truth, that you chose money over him, and that I chose him over everything else. She never replied. The silence that followed was different from the first. It was not charged. It was empty. That was when I realized the revenge I had not planned, the one that had unfolded on its own, was complete. I had not taken from her. I had simply stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own choices. And in doing so, I had protected the one person who mattered, the boy sleeping down the hall, the future my husband had believed in, and the woman I had finally become. Life did not snap back into place after that. It softened, slowly, unevenly, like a bruise fading one shade at a time. The house felt quieter without the constant anticipation of conflict. I found myself listening again to small things I had ignored for months. The tick of the clock in the hallway, the way the refrigerator hummed louder at night, the sound of Caleb humming to himself while doing homework, unaware he was doing it. But peace has a way of inviting reflection, and reflection can be just as unsettling as chaos. I began to think about my daughter not as an antagonist, but as a child I once held. I remembered the day she left for college, how proud I was, how terrified. I remembered arguments that ended without resolution, words thrown like stones that were never retrieved. I wondered how much of what she became was my fault. Margaret noticed the change in me when we met for coffee. You're grieving, she said gently. I thought that part was over. No, she replied. You're grieving the relationship you'll never have. That felt true and heavy. At home, I went through old boxes sorting things I had avoided. Photos, letters, report cards. In one box, I found a card my daughter wrote me when she was 12. Thank you for always choosing me, it said in uneven handwriting. I sat on the floor and cried until my chest hurt. That evening, Caleb asked if we could look at colleges online. It was early, but he was curious. We sat together on the couch, scrolling through campuses, talking about dorms and classes, and what it might feel like to leave home someday. Will you be okay when I go? He asked. I'll miss you, I said, but I'll be okay. He leaned his head against my shoulder. I won't forget who raised me. I realized then that legacy is not money, it is memory. A week later, something unexpected happened. My daughter's sister, my niece, reached out. She was in her 20s, newly married, tentative in her words. She said she had read the article, that she had questions, that she remembered summers at our house when my daughter disappeared for days and I made excuses. I didn't understand then, she wrote, but I do now. We met for lunch. She told me things I had never known, about my daughter borrowing money from relatives and never repaying it, about stories that changed depending on who was listening, about warnings people had tried to give me that I brushed aside out of loyalty. I felt foolish and relieved. Sometimes the truth does not come all at once. It arrives in fragments carried by people who finally feel safe enough to speak. The final legal matter wrapped up quietly. Permanent guardianship was formalized. Caleb's future secured. The trust administrator confirmed everything in writing. No more loose ends. That night I slept deeply for the first time in years. I dreamed of a road stretching forward, not empty but open. In the morning I woke with a clarity I had not felt before. I was no longer reacting to my daughter's choices. I was no longer defining myself by what I had survived. I was free to choose who I would be next. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I volunteered at the library once a week. Small acts maybe, but they mattered. They reminded me I was more than a guardian, more than a shield. I was a woman with her own life still unfolding. That night as I turned off the lights, I thought about the threat my daughter once made, that she would take everything from me. She never understood. Everything I valued was already rooted in me. And nothing that truly belongs to you can be taken by force. It can only be given up. And I was done giving. The call came on a Sunday evening, just as I was clearing the dinner dishes. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me stilled before I answered. When you have lived long enough, your body learns to recognize certain moments before your mind catches up. Is this Mrs. Harris? A man asked. Yes. My name is Thomas Reed. I'm calling regarding your daughter. I sat down slowly. What about her? He hesitated, then continued. She was admitted to County Memorial this afternoon. She listed you as next of kin. For a moment, I could not speak. The room felt distant, as if I were hearing everything through water. What happened? An overdose? Non-fatal? She's stable. I closed my eyes. I told him I would come. The hospital smelled the same as it always does. Sterile, unforgiving. I found her room at the end of a long corridor, lights dimmed, machines humming quietly. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile, her confidence stripped away by wires and pale sheets. She opened her eyes when I entered. "You came," she whispered. "I'm here," I said. There were no accusations, no anger, just exhaustion. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she spoke. I didn't think I had anything left. I pulled a chair closer. "You had choices." She laughed weakly. "You always say that. And you always ignore it." Tears slid down her temples into her hair. "I didn't want to hurt him. But you did." She nodded. "I know. I did not forgive her then. Forgiveness is not a reflex. It is a process. But I listened. And for the first time in years, she did not posture or manipulate. She spoke like someone who had reached the end of her own lies. She asked about Caleb. I told her he was doing well. I did not offer visits. I did not promise reconciliation. I offered facts. Before I left, she said something that stayed with me. I thought money would fix how empty I felt. I looked at her, really looked. Money only amplifies who you already are. When I returned home, Caleb was asleep. I sat at the edge of his bed and watched his chest rise and fall. I realized that loving someone does not mean surrendering your boundaries. Sometimes love looks like distance. The next morning I spoke with Margaret. She was quiet for a long moment after I told her. "You did the right thing," she said. "Going doesn't mean undoing everything." I know. As the weeks passed, my daughter entered treatment. She did not contact us again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had changed. The desperation that once fueled her threats had burned itself out. I did not feel victorious. I felt resolved. Because the story I would tell Caleb one day would not be about revenge. It would be about responsibility. About how choices echo. About how even when people hurt you deeply, you do not become them to survive. And about how strength is not measured by what you take from others, but by what you refuse to give up. Your dignity. Your truth. Your love placed carefully where it belongs. The morning light came softly that day, filtering through the curtains like it had nowhere else to be. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, and realized something quietly extraordinary. I was no longer bracing for impact. For most of my life, especially the last 10 years, I had lived in a state of readiness. Ready for the next crisis. Ready for disappointment. Ready to explain, defend, protect. That readiness had shaped my posture, my voice, even the way I slept. Now there was space. Caleb came downstairs, humming already dressed backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped when he saw me watching him. What he asked, half smiling. Nothing, I said, just noticing. He rolled his eyes the way only children do when they feel seen but not threatened by it. "I'm late." "I know," I said, "go." After the door closed behind him, I sat down and opened my laptop. The article was still circulating, shared quietly in circles I would never enter. Messages still arrived from strangers who recognized themselves in fragments of my story. I answered none of them publicly, but I read every word. Not because I needed validation, because it reminded me how many women like me had been taught to endure quietly. I began to write, not for the internet, not for court, just for myself. Pages of things I had swallowed over decades. Moments I wished I had handled differently. Lines I had crossed to keep peace. Lines I should have drawn sooner. Writing did not erase the past, but it reorganized it. That afternoon, I received a short update from the hospital social worker. My daughter had agreed to continued treatment. No requests, no demands, just information. I closed the email and let it be. Some chapters are not yours to write anymore. That evening, Caleb and I made dinner together. He told me about a goal he scored at practice, about a boy in his class who lied too much, about a science project he wanted help with. Life in its most ordinary and precious form. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "are you glad you kept me?" The question caught me off guard, not because I did not know the answer, but because I realized how much it mattered that he asked it now. "I didn't keep you," I said. "I chose you, every day." He nodded satisfied. That was enough. Later, after he went to bed, I stood in the hallway and looked at the photos on the wall. Not the ones with my daughter, the ones with him. Muddy shoes, missing teeth, birthday candles blown out crookedly. This was my inheritance. Not money, not vindication. Not even justice, though, that mattered. It was the quiet knowledge that when faced with a defining moment, I had not looked away. Revenge had never been my goal. Despite how it might look from the outside, what I wanted was protection, stability, a line drawn where exploitation ended. What happened to my daughter was not something I orchestrated. It was something I allowed to happen by stepping out of the way of her consequences. That distinction matters. If you are listening to this and you see yourself in my story, hear this clearly. Love does not require self-erasure. Family does not mean endless forgiveness without accountability. And being a woman over 50 does not make you weak. It makes you experienced. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to stop rescuing people from themselves. And you are allowed to choose peace without guilt. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Pride. Not the loud kind, the steady kind that does not need witnesses. The kind that comes from knowing you protected what mattered most. If this story spoke to you, if it stirred something you have been carrying quietly, stay with this space, share your thoughts, leave a comment, subscribe if you want more stories like this told honestly without shortcuts. Because sometimes the truth people try to take from you becomes the very thing that sets you free. And sometimes the strongest revenge is simply living well with your values intact and your love placed where it belongs.